So the next step, right? We're moving into basically deconstructivist. What did I call it? Deconstructivist assemblies, whatever. But what the basics of it really is that we're trying to move from the two-dimensional patterning and sort of list finding, list structuring, to the three-dimensional application. So in essence, what I'm going to start to do with this triangulated panel is to start to kind of lift it off its facade. And I'm going to look at what that could possibly mean in terms of developing some hardware for it and making it a little bit believable. Not perfectly believable yet, but getting into some kind of detail level where it's kind of viable. So the first thing I want to do is, as a design move, I want to start to kind of lift part of that panel up. And not the whole panel. I'm basically just going to kind of rotate one of the triangulations per quadrilateral. I'm just going to fold it out as if you took like an origami and you just cut two legs of this thing and you just folded it forward. So this is the first iteration of us, I think, moving into rotations. So have you guys used rotate? I don't think I introduced rotation to you yet, right? Great. So then it's the first application of rotations, which I love to introduce in three-dimensional applications before two-dimensional applications, because I feel like it's much more potent, right? You can use it a lot more. So essentially, what I want to do is jump ahead to the rotation and then work my way backwards. So in case any of you are confused about what exactly I mean, so imagine that this is one of our quads, right, that I'm holding up right here. And if I take this piece of paper, this square piece of paper, and I fold it in half, that's essentially what we've done. We've triangulated it into two triangles, right? You guys see that, essentially? So while the triangulation right now is very soft, in its orientation right here, I'm basically just going to take that panel and rotate it up. Okay, so why am I using a rotation? It's kind of a question, a rhetorical question, but really, it's because it's the most realistic way that this kind of a thing might be manufactured on a simple application, right? You have square panels or square-ish panels, and you take it and you break bend it in the middle and tilt it up, right? So essentially what we've got to do is isolate the geometry that we want to modify and then kind of shove that modification directly into the definition itself. And if we're using rotation, the good thing is it happens at the end. It happens exactly where we are right now. Because rather than moving a point, well, we could do it either way. We could rotate the point around and then remap the surface to the new point location, or we could rotate the surface itself. There are many different ways of doing it. It depends when, but the simple form right now that I'm going to use is to just rotate this surface. So essentially, let's go to the Transform tab under the Euclidean panel, and this is our first foray into rotation. So let's kind of go over, there are 4 different types of rotates here. And it's important to know the differences between these primary rotations. The first one just says rotate an object in a plane. Very simply, it picks the plane, which has a direction and orientation, and it just spins you around the z-axis of that particular plane. Now, this one also says rotate an object in a plane. But when I drop it into the field here, it takes the geometry, it gets the center point, and it gets a frame. Sorry, not a frame. The from point, and then it has a target axis. So rather than rotating it in a plane that's defined by a plane, this one is actually rotating it from a particular direction in plane to another direction. Okay, so that's what the difference is there. And then the other Euclidean here is rotate 3D, which says it'll rotate it around a center point and an axis vector. So that's vector based, which is a very important distinction. And then the last one is rotate axis. So rotate axis you don't really know what an axis is right now until you drop it in, and then the X tells you that this little symbol right here tells you that it's a line. Okay, so we can rotate it around a plane. We can rotate it from vector to vector. We can rotate it around a vector, or we can rotate it around a line. Yes?
Can you save your 5 on
Yes. Hang on. So moving on, guys, without knowing too much, I think it's pretty easy to discern that the one we want to use is rotate around a line. Perhaps, right? Because if you look at this paper that I just created, the triangles are bound by edges, which are essentially curves or lines if they're straight. And so what I'm doing here physically is rotating it around that line. And so this is the application I'm going to use here. So this is found under transform, whoops, Euclidean, and we just got to work backwards. So the geometry, the base geometry that we're going to rotate is this set of surfaces right here. So I can plug that in now, and what you'll find is that it's kind of taking the whole thing and rotating it down based off of what its default factors are. So the angle is measured in radians. For all of these rotational features, you'll have to convert what you would input as degrees into radians. We'll get there in a second. But we first want to define the rotational axis. Okay, so this is the line that it's going to rotate around. So in order to isolate that line, I want to rotate it around a particular edge of each of these panels from their original position. So I'm going to use what tool? What two tools, actually? From here. I want to isolate an edge from all those panels. What two tools am I going to use?
list item and
What was that?
List item?
List item, yes. And deconstruct brep. So we first need to break it, right? Deconstruct and then reconstruct. So we isolate the line and we use that. So we go to list item now and we use that as a rotational line, a rotational axis. So after I list item it, because these are now triangles, my slider only needs to go from 0 to 2. And let me look a little closer here. As I slide it across, I need to find essentially the hypotenuse. That's what I'm going to fold it around, the hypotenuse. So that's my number 2. It might not be your number 2, it's my number 2.
mine when I did rotate, instead of going down, it went sideways.
It might be okay. Go with it for now.
Alright.
So then you probably can guess where this is supposed to plug into. It plugs into the axis of rotation for the rotation. And this is what you get. It's essentially a medieval torture chamber right now. So now the other part is, how do we get radians when I want to give it degrees, right? I want to say, I want to rotate this thing anywhere from 0 to 90 degrees. Or I could say from 0 to 180 if I wanted it to fold all the way over. I'll make it 180 just because. So the angle is essentially going to be a slider from 0 to 180, and then there's a trigonometric conversion that essentially just takes your slider and converts it to radians. So the slider 0 to 180 will be converted by going to math, and now we're going to go over to trig. And in trig, there's this nifty tool right here that converts an angle specified in degrees, right, specified by me as degrees, and converts it to radians. So this just takes my degree input, converts it to radians, and I plug that in here. And ultimately, once you turn off this old geometry, this is what you're left with here in perspective view. You could just take this slider and start rotating those panels out. Pretty nifty, huh? I take your lack of response as a resounding yes, that's nifty.
I have to make my slider like way bigger than just. Oh, okay. How big did you make it? 100?
0 to 180.
Okay.
Yeah, because these are in degrees now. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to stop this video right here. Make sure you're all caught up before I start moving into some of those, more hardware-driven pieces. Where now we're going to go back to old information and make it new.